Hey guys, I am DM Zone. This is Gamer's Oasis. Let's get into it. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk about define what exactly evil is, and I'm making reference specifically to original Dungeons and Dragons. The reason why this topic is even coming up is because in 1974 Dungeons and Dragons, when this edition of the game came out, there was no good, there was no evil. A lot of people attribute law and chaos as sort of an abstract good and evil. And I'm going to talk about in this video how yes but no, and how this might have changed through the supplements and the magazines that came out around that period of time. One might ask, why is this important? Why do we care? What is it about this that matters? It's just, good and evil, like how does that affect the game? I could see how a modern player might think that in the 5th edition and the 24th, what we're going to call 5.5, they have less with alignment than they did in prior editions. And in 1974, they probably are before they got really specific. There's a lot of nuance about the game, and it clarifies how the world is supposed to work and why certain things are done the way they are, and sort of their insight in how they were viewing and how the game was supposed to work. The first reference of evil in the 3 core books from 1974 is actually in the prologue, where it talks about fantasy novels like Howard's Conan the Barbarian and the Destroyer and all that, and Fritz Lieber's Farhard in the Grey Mauser, pitting their swords against evil sorceresses. It's important to realize that this is a multifaceted. When you say evil, and then you say a cleric's rank next to it, like an evil high priest or priestess, these are considered to be anti-clerics, but those are different than evil, because evil and anti-cleric, or the chaotic cleric, are different. Anti-clerics have their own options and are actually able to have henchmen, and they have their own wandering monster entries and tables and this type of stuff. And you'll notice that in the column of in the alignment columns, you have patriarch over in law, and you have evil clerics over in the chaos, but they're not actually the same. So are they just conflating these two words into the same thing? And the answer is not exactly. In many ways, evil is not chaotic. It becomes more clear about that later. But evil is a mindset. It's against the players. You'll notice that when you start to see it literally in spell titles, making reference to some sort of action. For example, protection from evil, detect evil, dispel evil, which is a spell that clerics get at 5th level. I'm going to make more references about this later in the game when I start talking about things like remove curse, which is also a spell that involves evil sending. So mechanics in the game is where good and evil define themselves. You have to really kind of know what that is, because if you have a mechanic that gives evil enemies a -1 to hit, then that you need to know that. And if it's not just enemies, because then that would be enemies get -1 to hit, not just evil, then what is the difference between a neutral enemy or a good enemy and a evil enemy? And that's the thing this game never actually goes in and fully describes. You have to wait till Supplement 1, Greyhawk, to even start to get the game to talk about this in some manner of speaking. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the modifiers and items you're going to find that have mechanics associated with them. For example, you're going to find Scare of a Protection from Evil High Priest. Well, that one's a little bit similar, but if a NPC were to have that, or a PC were to have that, and someone's anti-cleric were to happen upon them, does that make them evil, or is it their action? Does a neutral cleric or something of that nature, is the fact that they are a cleric technically the thing, or if it was a evil or a chaotic magic user, would that suffice? It's very specific. So as I said a few times, there is no actual official rules that are defining good and evil. No mechanics that say players can't be evil and this type of stuff. I believe this is a question by Mr. Gygax, one of the founders of the game, to try and drive the morality of combat and of grave robbing and not judging it. What I'm saying is he's not saying it's specifically evil, but it's not necessarily without moral implications or complications. And he wanted something more than just a war simulator when it came to this game. This is in the very early days of gaming, when a lot of people were doing a very war game type of approach. And I think this was him trying to remove that, but then make that more of a high level question that was being asked of certain things. I think later also he changes his opinion on this. So this was probably what he was thinking before he did like way more playtesting or saw how it affected other people in the game. This isn't necessarily what Gygax would have thought even in the 80s probably. For a player who wants to be considered good, his line of thought, I believe, is they need to act. Their actions need to define them as good. For characters who would like to be known as evil, the same. They need to act that way. They need to do things. There is no lukewarm evil dude. You might be a low-key evil dude, but you're not going to be lukewarm. You're going to have things that define you. And the reason why that is because there's a saying, and it goes something like this. Rebels fighting against what they believe to be an unjustified or evil ruler might consider themselves righteous, while the traditions of law might make those who work for the ruler to consider themselves to be righteous and to taking down the anarchist rebels who are fighting against them. It's about perspective. So while one group might consider the other group evil, they're not. Or maybe they both are. More than once in history, there have been two groups who did horrible things in the name of good. There's a quote, T.S. Eliot, "The most evil in the world is by people with good intentions." Now, that's wrote for a very serious topic, and I'm not going to go into that here. But I think that's kind of what Gygax was trying to avoid completely in this game. I think he was trying to have this be like a higher level question and not actually dive specifically into good and evil. Especially in 1974, Gygax was still a fairly religious man, and as a person who is religious themselves, I can understand why one would struggle with the concept of good and evil in the game and would want that clearly defined, or at least at a higher level than just a game mechanic. I have made reference to Supplement 1 Greyhawk, and in there it clarifies the difference between evil and chaotic to some degree. And I think it's worth pointing out that most of Greyhawk campaign came from Gygax's personal campaign. And in that book he speaks about chaotic alignment. A chaotic character is just that. They are chaotic, i.e. they're unpredictable. They're going to do this, they're going to do that. I would say a great example of this, if you want to watch this live, would be Malcolm Reynolds from Firefly. He would be a chaotic character. Now, he's chaotic good in my opinion, but he's chaotic. They're as likely to stab their buddy in the back for some sort of game as they're not to stab their buddy in the back. They could even have an ethos to this, like some sort of weird, twisted way this makes sense in their mind. An example of this I might give is Murdoch from the A-Team. Now, that TV show is kind of dating me. But Murdoch has his own ethos. It just doesn't necessarily make sense to everyone else in the world. I've added some words to try and polish this up a little bit. Here's how it looks inside the book when Gygax is talking about chaotic and evil. Evil creatures are likely to turn on their supposed confidence in order to have all the loot as they are to attack lawful in the first place. Now, what's the difference between always taking chaotic actions for their own gain and they're likely to attack their own confederates for all the loot? it's a very subtle nuance. In my opinion, that is the difference between indirect and direct. So a chaotic person does something because they want something and they aren't necessarily concerned about the consequences. An evil character will do something planned so that they get what they want and they understand and know what the consequences are as and before they're doing it, if that makes sense. So basically, there's not a lot of difference between these two, but there is difference. And when you dive into the psychology of how they are different, for example, or someone who's just a bit dumb, a little dense. Another big part of this is about cosmic forces. Gygax was also trying to really push this idea, which was inspired from Three Hearts, Three Lions by Paul Anderson. In that book, he makes reference to law, neutrality, and chaos as being cosmic powers that push and pull people behind the scenes for a greater war than mortals, that mortals do not even really know they're taking part in. And in that, it basically states that law and chaotic people are pitted against each other and will have these fights for no known reason. And I don't necessarily think that is the same when you're dealing with good and evil. So that changes probably how these alignments would interact a lot. And if you're going to start throwing some blue logic into it, some alien morality from some ancient, probably elder god type of thought process, I can understand why Gygax didn't want to put that directly into the game and wanted to make it just sort of a higher level thought process. We're going to see a few Lovecraftian influences as we go. And Lovecraft was basically on the Appendix N list as far as an influence for Gygax. I would say this nuance is part of the struggle that D&D has faced with alignment throughout all the editions, up to and including the apathy it has towards alignment now in the new editions, when people want their characters defined by something more than, a background potentially. So even now, I don't think it's perfect. Like I've said a couple times in Supplement 3, they start taking sort of an AD&D approach, which came out around the same time, where you have lawful good and lawful evil. I'm going to have a slide go by showing some of this stuff here. And also coming out in this roundabout time, a little bit later in this, you're going to have stuff like White Wolf's Vampire the Masquerade that came out. Now, just talking about this game just for a second. In that game, they have nature and demeanor, which is basically what you think on the inside and what you represent others to other people. It'd be like a very simplistic way of putting it. And also sort of another way to judge that same matrix. You have humanity or path if you're not on the path of humanity. And that's sort of your moral compass, not good and evil, but how attached to humanity a person might be. Might have some virtue signaling involved. However, this is not about virtue signaling. This is about like how you actually are. It's just they will ding, 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 ding. You know what I'm saying? You'll feel it because of our modern perspective. They didn't have that necessarily back then. When I did my actual play, I came up with my own, what I call personality, which was a far more in depth than old D&D, than original Dungeons and Dragons, and different than any of the games I've been in. And to be fair, the reason why I did was not because I wanted to redefine what law, chaos, good, and evil was, but I wanted to have some sort of default decision-making mechanism put into the game so that when I'm playing these characters, they're not making the decision that I would make. They're making the decision that their character would make based off of their personalities, which I found actually ended up driving a lot of their alignment. Anyways, in 1974, there's actually a section in those rules where anti-clerics and evil clerics, it even suggests in there talking about they could be one and the same, talking about you can replace the spell Raise Dead with Finger of Death. There are also other spells that can be done that way. In later supplements, they talk about the fact that one could cause the disease effect of basically crud by casting a Cure Light Wounds while being an anti-cleric. You basically give someone stomach aches, make them nauseous by casting a Cure Light spell on them. I think there are other uses for that, and I think it'd be kind of fun if you were to have an anti-cleric in the party, for you to have like one-to-one trades where they would not have the intended use of the spell, but they basically have their own. It kind of makes it the anti-cleric literally into its own class, though, kind of like a paladin, but of the chaotic alignment. I mean, I could start to see things like Cure Light Wounds be Inflict Light Wounds, Purify Food and War as being Spoil Food and War, Protection from Good and Evil being, reverse, and so on. Detections, that type of stuff. They go into anti-cleric a little bit more, sort of like it's a new class. If we get 50 likes, I think I'll do a full breakup on this as a class, going beyond the fact that they lose their ability to turn undead, and maybe like what I would do to replace it, if anything. And then I would probably dive into my thoughts of evil versus anti-clerics and the differences between these two. And of course, when you get into things like having their own castles and armies that travel with them, for example, Mordor, would that be chaotic or would that be evil? In Gygax Sample Dungeon, the Arena of Evil, as being a specific location. One can only imagine the gladiatorial pits and this type of stuff that must have happened there for that to be considered evil. So outside of the evil high priest, there's no monster or creature types that refer to themselves directly as evil, either in the text or in the title and that type of stuff. And there's no reference to what evil is in 1974 rules. But in the layer supplements, in supplement 1 and in 3, there are several. There's actually 7 that I found. I'm going to go through these and to start talking about these both as chaotic and evil and lawful as evil. So in supplement 3 especially, they start making reference to them being 2 different parts, the lawful evil and the chaotic evil, as I talked about earlier with the Mind Flare and Intellect Devourer. So let's jump into it specifically with them. Intellect Devourers are both chaotic and they're evil. They're fairly intelligent with a highly malign regard for sentient life. I'd probably clarify that sentient life to sentient life on our plane of existence, which feels very Lovecraftian. This is because they're actually one of the earliest versions of like dual existence in Dungeons & Dragons, as they're able to perceive what is going on in both the ethereal and astral plane at the same time. I'm actually going to be doing a special video release on Halloween, and I'm going to be talking about the astral and ethereal plane on that day. So look for that video coming out then, if you want to learn more. Mind Flares. These are supernatural, intelligent, man-shaped creatures of great and lawful evil. So is there such a thing as a great evil? Because they kind of put that in brackets right there, which makes it weird. What does great evil and what does that mean? Oh, I think that probably means like a great and malign dislike towards humanity, probably of this plane of existence. Very Cthulhu, Elder God type of thing, which Mind Flayers are considered to be astronauts traveling through space, right? Isn't that weird? So the first reference we have to evil is in Supplement 1. We would know this creature as Tiamat. They refer to this one as the Dragon Queen. She's referred to as being a huge creature with 5 heads, 1 for each color of the dragon. There's a whole bunch more on this creature. It's not important for this video. It just says in the very bottom, her aim is to spread evil. So we see that she's more than just the embodiment of 5 different chaotic dragons. She's designed to spread evil. Another reference is hellhounds. It refers to these as reddish-brown hounds of evil disposition which have the ability to breathe fire. The Shawagin, aka the devil men of the deep, are said to have sadistic, cannibalistic cultures. which are a bunch of big words for saying they get pleasure out of hurting people and then they enjoy eating them. They are said to be created by the evil ones. I would make that to be some sort of elder god, very Lovecraftian again. And then we actually get to actual demons. They refer to them as chaotic and as evil. There's a lot of these, ranging from princes to something that would qualify as basically a dangerous slug, and they are nearly without number. Now, devils are the same thing, they're just lawful. Again, I'm going to kind of count that as the same thing because they're, at this point in time especially, very similar. They just have different origins. And lastly, we have I'm going to probably mispronounce this because it's just a very short word, but the Sioux monster, which are both chaotic and evil, being referred to as twisted creatures of a mixture of animal parts, basically something off of the island of Dr. Moreau, which is a good book, a fun, cheesy, B-rated movie. And there's a D&D module out there called Neither Beast Nor Man, which I have personally run twice for AD&D 2nd edition. That is actually a pretty good play and could almost be done in a one-shot. In a long one-shot, you could get away with that game. In Strategic Review number 3, which came out in the autumn of 75, there's a reference to ghosts. These are spirits of humans that were truly evil in life. So, if you're evil, I think Gygax kind of views this as like a corruption. And when you die, maybe this continues. Also dealing with the spirit side of things and with evil, there is the spirit Naga, the only Naga that is actually truly evil. The other ones are either neutral or good. These actually are able to cast clerical spells. And in the last strategic review, number 5, you have a borrowed evil creature from the India belief system. Now, I'm not talking about Indian like American Indian. I'm talking about like India, the country. And there they have the Rakshasa, which is a tiger-looking humanoid that is considered to be an evil spirit encased with flesh who likes to eat human meat. Again, if you didn't know better, that sounds like some sort of elder evil that hates sentient life on this plane of existence type of thing, or sadistic with a malaligned disdain for people, which okay. And real quickly to reference how there's like these cosmic forces, hellhounds tend to specifically be evil, and they tend to be able to be like henchmen essentially, or not really pets, but sort pseudo pets for many evil characters. And these same characters might be writing creatures like chimeras. Specific, they talk about an evil high priest riding a chimera. And then right below it, they talk about that heroes and that hero elf type of thing could be riding a Lamassu, which is specifically a good lawful creature. There's also some effects that specific evil beings, persons can be affected by. For example, the Talisman of Lawfulness allows a patriarch the ability to sink an evil high priest to the center of the earth forever. While that sounds incredibly biblical, I think we need to define what is evil, or is it if you roll an evil high priest in on the chart that this can happen? And what if it's just an evil priest, not an evil high priest? There is 7 charges, so maybe they're just trying to tell you you can't do this. But if you're going to die, who cares if it's a high priest or a priest? You want that thing removed. If anyone who's not lawful, but especially anyone who's an evil cleric touches it, they will get hit for pretty big damage. There's also the Book of Exalted Deeds, which is also bad for those who are not lawful specifically. And if you are specifically evil and a chaotic cleric, it's really bad. On the other end of things, though, you have the Book of Vile Darkness, which is specifically does bad things for those who are not chaotic or evil. And if you're a paladin who touches it, and you do not have both a remove curse and a dispel evil cast on them, going back to that evil sending, within the first 24 hours, then you will lose your paladinhood forever. Which might make you an anti-paladin, which could be worse or better, if you depending on your point of view, than the anti-cleric. Specifically, Vecna has several relics that are associated with him or his people, like the Sword of Kos, for example, the hand and eye of Vecna. There are several other relics, though, like the Wand of Orcus, the Iron Flask of Tuni the Merciless. Most of these are, and some of the orbs of Dragonkind are more evil than others. But truly, the most evil of all those items has to be the Poisonous Cloak. Okay, I'm kidding a little bit. The reason why the Poisonous Cloak is on the list is because you get no save and you have no idea. It's just a regular, mundane, cursed item. But if you put it down, you're dead. There is nothing. If I was to make a safe guess, anything that is titled back then, you have to really be sure your alignment matches up with it, because they were very fond of this type of stuff back in the day. So we've discussed a lot of information so far in this video. A lot of creatures, a lot of spells, a lot of magic items, a lot of relics, and all these type of things. I think this complicates the game a lot more. I think this is some of what 74 Gygax was trying to prevent, where maybe Gygax, by the time he got the Eldritch Wizardry, was trying to embrace. I think that just shows the growth of the game, because as you watch Gygax go into AD&D First Edition, he has all these things. But if you look into the BX series, you can see there's still that plea, that cling to only making it about this one plane of existence. And if I was to talk about the advanced versus the basic in sort of a very specific way, I would say this and rule density and putting it more in the hands of the referee are the two biggest things that are different between AD&D and Basic Expert BX. For example, in BX there is only the prime material plane. There is no heaven, there is no hell, there's no elemental plane of fire. In the Basic Expert Edition, you do not have demons, you don't have fire elementals, and they do not answer these questions. These are things outside the scope of the game. It makes it much more approachable by newer and younger players, probably. It also allows you to ask other questions about what your character is doing and what drives them. If you look at AD&D, some would say, most would say, it has a lot more crunch, a lot more mechanics about it. And they dive into having multiple planes. They actually have like a book. I have it on my shelf, the orange spine one over there, called the Manual of the Planes. And I think they're more willing to talk about, okay, you have devils, you have demons, you have angels, you have fire elementals. So you have good and evil. Where do they come from? This is now in your game. Can your players go there? I would say that Gygax almost would prefer that to be yes, but not live there. Because I think one of the things they got tired of is people basically moving to these outer planes, traveling around and killing all the gods. That kind of became a thing that inspired things like Tomb of Horrors. Okay, so let's talk about something maybe a little less hyperbolic, I guess. Even though I'm not overly hyperbolic in my phrasing of it. Let's talk about paladins. Oh, yeah, maybe. In Supplement 1, it talks about the fact that they can dispel evil as a 5th level cleric spell. Okay, so it made me have to look into what is the dispel evil about. When I look into it, it talks about the fact that they can target spells, undead, evil enchanted monsters, and the like. So, a person that picks up the Book of Vile Darkness, who's a paladin, can have that dispelled off them. So that would be a lot like what is found in the Remove Curse, which is also made reference in there, talking about evil sending. And here we have evil enchanted monsters. So my thoughts are charm person, maybe a hold person could borderline do it as a spell. undead, which are animated. There's a lot of things like that that kind of flow with that. What if you had like a golem that was enchanted? Would that qualify? Or is that just considered a construct? I don't know. I would say golems don't because they don't have freedom of will. If freedom of will is something you're going to consider, well, that's a lot. There's a lot that goes into freedom of will. However, if you take that type of stuff into consideration, now the paladin's ability to dispel evil in the 5th level spell, which has to be a powerful level spell, truly has more meaning. Also in the Eldritch Wizardry, where it talks about the fact that forests can be enchanted or can be evil themselves, and that druids won't destroy that. They will find ways to bring that back. If you're bringing that back, that sounds like a redemption arc, as if maybe there's a level of sentience, a choice, the freedom of will to choose a different direction. What are we saying about a group of trees, a forest, that they have some avatar-like sentience, that they can be changed from evil to good? I think this begs a lot more questions than it answers. Or maybe is it talking about the fact that there's something out there that has caused a hex or an enchantment, this evil sending to be placed upon the forest to make it evil itself, to turn things darker, make shadows a little darker. I think that's, again, do you have the source of evil, or you just have evil acts that are being committed? The AD&D versus the basic thought process. So in the beginning of the video, I talked about how understanding good and evil can clarify a lot of things about this edition of the game per se. Now, I didn't play OD&D when it came out. I've only played it in the last 36 years I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons. And I've done a lot of in-depth research. And most of what I've done with the OD&D actually is my solo play, so I can understand the game myself, so I can talk more clearly about it. And understanding these things, I think, allows me, at least, to see more of how the cosmic powers of chaos and law move versus potentially the influences of good and evil upon the world in a different way, and how they could be both sort of the same thing in an abstract way if you want, or you could clearly make those into two different things, so you can have chaotic good and chaotic evil. Now, I'm not going to try and get crazy and have chaotic neutral. We'll save that for future edition of the game, but they did go out to 9 different alignments at one point in time. And I think it's also possible that with some hand waving, you could go ahead and say enemies equal evil. And you'd have to ignore a few things and have a few things twisted or tweaked maybe to have it work. But I think that version of the game also does very well. But if you wanted to go closer to Eldritch Wizardry into the AD&D mindset and have complicated good and complicated evil, I think that that could be a very exciting game. And I think that's why you start to see things like the astral plane and the ethereal plane being brought in, because you have to have these sources, this influence from outside of here. Any way you look at it, I think it's just very helpful to find where spells like Charm Person and Suggestion and those type of things fall in the spectrum. And what would you allow that to be disenchanted by? And how evil sending works in your game. Why is it that Remove Curse specifically says evil sending, yet never talks about it? And what exactly is Dispel Evil actually doing? Does it remove the hold on a person, the enchantment? Does it just destroy the person like it does undead? I mean, that might sound far-fetched, but think about it like this. You have Raise Dead at 5th level, and if you're an anti-cleric, you could have Finger of Death. Remember, in this version of the game, magic is super powerful, and mundane, God-fearing men like Conan the Barbarian really had to be mindful of magic. I hope I didn't get you asking more questions than you left here with, and I hope I answered a lot of the questions or maybe pushed you in a direction, whether it's running something closer to BX like I did for literally years, or if it's pushing you towards AD&D, which is something I've done a little bit of. And I actually started in AD&D second edition, which is a different game, but not by a lot. And, I had a lot of fun. But just remember, if you're playing BX and you want something like ghosts or specters, it's not that they can't exist. It's just they have no place to go. There is no ethereal and astral plane. They're just either destroyed or put to rest. They're a true torment. So how they're represented in your world can be a little bit different. The things you'd want to avoid are things that need a source of origin. Hellhounds can't be from hell if there's no hell. Fire elementals have no place on the prime material unless you have some way of generating and making fire elementals. And then what do you do with air and water? How does that work? So you need to think about this. I think what you're going to find is if you don't have good and evil, then you're going to find yourself in a little bit more of a low magic Conan-like world. And if you do have good and evil, which is basically the whole story of Lord of the Rings, then you're going to end up with something with a lot more of a high magic feel. And you're going to have Malars, which is Gandalf, which is basically an angel. And you're going to have the evil in the world. And at some point in time, and someday I'll talk about this too when I talk about AD&D second edition, I'm going to make reference to Spelljammer. You might end up with more sci-fi going on, where you're traveling from gray space to realm space in a course of adventure. Anyways, guys, sort of a weird cliff note to end on, but I really didn't want to keep rambling on, and I think I've discussed this topic at length. What do you guys think? Did I get this one right? Did I get this one wrong? What would you guys say differently? Would I forget to leave out? Do I need a part 2 on this? Do I need to wrap this up with something succinct that makes it all sounds good at the very end? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you. Have a great day and keep rolling those dice. Bye.